Delighted to be here, very honored to be here, and especially speak after my own guru, Professor Muni, my friend. I was delighted to hear your director say that MIT SOG is involved in so much of peace studies also. That's a subject very close to my own heart, on which I do quite a lot of work also. So today, your topic of what to do with AFPAC, if I can just make a comment first on this topic itself, I can tell you the Afghan people don't like this term AFPAC. They are very nationalist. Even the Taliban, we don't consider it a progressive nationalism, it's a religious extremist force, but it is very clear on its sovereignty. The Russians and others don't like AFPAC, only the Pakistanis like it, and very often, many in the Indian international community term it like this. This was especially so before the Americans took over. So I will not really be using that term. What my first argument is that how is Afghanistan being framed? Is it just a geostrategic problem where every power, from the colonial to the imperialists to the regional, whether it's Pakistan, Turkey, Iran, the Saudis, are they primarily concerned either with hegemony or only their own security at the cost of others' security? Now, if you frame it only as a geostrategic problem, my argument is that this is a continuation of colonial knowledge construction and colonial policy. So my second point, therefore, is that do we also see the human aspects, the humanitarian crisis, the spillover of fundamentalism, the spillover of violence, oppression of women and minorities? So, and then my third point, and I'm going to do it point-wise because I have 10 minutes, I was told, is about the geopolitical interventions. These interventions and imperialism is not just of the US, but also of regional players. And in this, I would argue that there was a Russian intervention, there is Pakistan, Iran, and almost all of them. And all these, they use these interventions, they superimpose them on domestic, local Afghan ethnic rivalries in Afghanistan. And they have created this tragedy which is unfolding in this region across decades now. So it's critical to see Afghanistan holistically and not just as a geostrategic game for world powers. And I think India and maybe Southeast Asia are some of the countries which have seen it more holistically than others, though sometimes they have had their own linkages and prisms, as Professor Muni cited, and I will go into later. My fourth point is really to show the repeat pattern which has been happening in Afghanistan and which continues. And that is very quickly, one, British colonialism used Afghanistan as a buffer between Russia's southward advance and British colonial possessions in India in the 19th century, ending in the Russian Afghan Border Commission or Russian British Border Commission of 1885, if you see the documents. Second, the Russians used intervention in Afghanistan to fortify their own security positions during the Cold War and to uphold a failing and faction-ridden pro-Soviet Afghan regime. The perceived oppression there of Islam and the government, communist government of Dawood, led to the rise of Islamic nationalism, of political Islam, and the creation of the Taliban and the Mujahideen. Remember, in Pakistan had 36,000 seminaries training the Mujahideen. So it was the same factory of the Mujahideen who created the Taliban. And this continues. And with this, a massive inflow of arms, mercenaries, private security, the rise of poppy cultivation. Those who followed Afghanistan will know how the UN and the US bombed acres of poppy cultivation for it only to grow back within 6 months. The illegal opium trade and the Russian withdrawal in 1989 was seen as a major geostrategic victory by the US the Pakistan and US allies. They termed it the Russian, Vietnam, etc. Then when the pro-Russian, independent regime of Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, the US again sought revenge for the 9/11 attacks. But here I would argue, and you can see it in all the documents coming out now from the US, and especially in Washington Post, that the US interest in Afghan was marginal. Their real interest was restructuring West Asia. It was a dangerous game, and there were two wars at that time. That in taking over Afghanistan, which was secondary, the primary was Iraq and then Syria. Of course, the US hit some of the Al-Qaeda bases and that terror group, but they also knew that Al-Qaeda was primarily in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, which they ignored. But this was advantageous for the US's own geostrategic desire to reconstruct West Asia and for the simultaneous interventions. Now, when US has withdrawn, who sees it as a victory? Again, Pakistan. So Pakistan saw it as a victory in 1989, and now again in 2021, it's a constant. So you can see the clever geopolitics of Pakistan and why the Afghan people are against Pakistan. They have been a constant in intervention in the sovereignty of Afghanistan. Next, there are also the regional powers, and their conflicts and militarisms have come into constant play in Afghanistan. So if Pakistan was a key to the ideological nurturing of the Taliban, at that time, India supported, or at least not physically, but of course, emotionally, they supported the Northern Alliance. The US versus Iran and Iraq played out in Afghanistan. Iran's long border with Afghanistan was a cause for regional tensions and to various Taliban groups. Saudi Arabia and Turkey's search for regional influence played out in Afghanistan. The Central Asian states, and you wanted me to focus on that, the main concern of Russia throughout, and especially now, is about the possibility of religious extremism entering Russia and Central Asia, and they are the most likely to be affected, along with South Asia, India especially. And why? Number one, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and Turkmenistan all have borders, but leave alone borders with Afghanistan. They are fairly autocratic regimes, and the opposition there are Islamic movements, like the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, which is a main opposition to this autocratic regime in Uzbekistan. And this Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, and yesterday, even in Russia, the Caucasus, Chechnya, some of the areas in the Baltics where there are, religious extremist underground movements which are opposing the Russian regime, which are opposing the local regime. Yesterday, they came out in support of the Taliban. They welcomed Taliban victory, whereas Russia and all the Central Asian countries have been very, very cautious and very concerned. But the other thing is that Russia mans the border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan with its 201st Motorized Division. And so there is great concern about the spread of religious extremism, about the poppy trade, about opium, about trafficking, which can carry on. So that is as far as Central Asia and Russia is concerned. China, as Professor Muni very correctly put it, I think they are the real neo-colonial economic power, which is looking for entry if there is a stable Afghanistan. And I'll tell you why. America spent $2 trillion. Of course, only 4% of that $1 trillion went to the Afghan people. The rest was on security, on the American army, on the so-called Afghan forces, which melted away in 2 weeks. So people didn't benefit, but so why did America spend this $2 trillion, mainly for West Asia, for Iraq, etc. Afghanistan, they could not take out any money or any resources from Afghanistan. And that is also one of the reasons they have left. So it's not a classic imperialism case. It's a case of asserting American hegemony in West Asia, in Asia, North Asia, etc. So whereas the Chinese, they're interested in this spec, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, and they will uphold the Taliban as long as they allow China to enter and they get economic benefits only. Of course, the classic model always is that flag follows trade. Earlier in colonial time, it was trade following flag. That means, the army would come, make space for trade. But now, and you can see this from the Chinese model, they will first have trade and then they will have some military to protect this. But remember, what they want from Afghanistan is basically raw material and lithium, as was cited earlier, but this requires 13, 14 years of economic investment. So yes, China will give assistance and they believe in unconditional assistance. So they will not ask for human rights, etc., like liberal democracies do. They will give it some assistance to stabilize Taliban, but they also do not want a spillover of conflict to their own Xinjiang and other regions. So no one is interested in this spillover of conflict, except perhaps Pakistan. But this conflict can spill over to Pakistan. And I think Professor Muni was completely right, because there is a Pakistan Taliban, and there is a Pashtun issue, which is very critical for Pakistan. And they do not want one Pashtunistan, which is, there's a nationalist, subnationalism in Pashtunistan, which Pakistan is very, very over. So if they use, fundamentalist forces, including the Haqqani network, the Daesh, the IS, which are all there and want a role in the pie, it's a double-edged sword for Pakistan itself. So this has been the pattern, and what we fear now as this pattern can continue. And I'll get on to the last part of this. Like, how can this pattern continue? One, you can see from the US has not fully disengaged. Since it withdrew, it's bombed twice. It is looking for new military bases around that area. They are asking Kyrgyzstan, which earlier had both Russian and US military bases, just less than 50 miles from each other. So they would, Turkmenistan can give them a base again. They had it earlier also. They're asking India for their logistic support. So they're looking for new military bases and re-engagement from a different kind of way. Their geostrategists, truckloads of them, are working on this. Then their domestic discourse is again about defeat, hegemony, and how to curb China. So they will support Taliban to curb China, if possible. Pakistan may not oblige the US with bases, but they would work along with China and they would like to be the major advisors for Taliban, but I think this would be temporary. The Taliban would want to assert their own sovereignty. Russia is concerned with its own security and influx of political Islam and religious extremism into Central Asia and into the Caucasus in Russia. Already, as I told you, Caucasus groups have welcomed the Taliban, but nonetheless, they will have a transactional relation like China with the Taliban, where they will give it assistance in return that there is no export of security. Now, can Taliban control that? Can they control the ISIS and the Daesh and the Haqqani network? Because the Taliban want domestic control. They're not interested in spreading global jihad, which the ISIS and the Daesh, Haqqani network, Al-Qaeda, etc. are interested in. So there is a contradiction there already. Pakistan, of course, sees it as a strategic debt and mainly as a victory against India. But they will support China's entry into Afghanistan. So really, what is the solution and what should be India's role? India has invested almost $1 billion in Afghanistan and on good projects. They were building the Afghan parliament. They were getting scores, as all of us know, we've given lectures to all these areas. They were getting students and their civil servants and those in institutions for training and capacity building. Groups like SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, were working in Kabul, training women. So that is why a large number of Afghan people are very sympathetic for relations with India, and India needs to build it. But what should India's position be? One, Professor Moni talked of calibrated position. I would say, extend it to say, it should be calibrated. India's development assistance, by the way, has traditionally been non-conditional. They say, because we also have this thing about not intervening in sovereignty. But I think there's time for a transition. India's approach should be not only calibrated, it should be conditional, it should be accountable, and there should be a deep studies of Afghanistan to see what is happening at the various levels, at the level not just of the government and factions within, but minorities, women, people to people, agriculture, etc. So, and I agree, India's prism should not be geostrategic entirely. Of course, they have to watch their geostrategy, and security issues and terrorism is a major issue, but it should be liberated from just seeing it through Pakistan and and linking up entirely with the US. I think this position of talking with Russia is very important. It's critical, in fact, because this will give India strategic autonomy in the region. And India needs to have a moral position also, like it did earlier, in which they assist students, the refugees, and not just, one category of refugees that, okay, we'll take in, according to religious minorities. They should also take in people from civil society and those Afghans who are generally under threat for having opposed the Taliban. They should be very clear on the drugs issue. They should support UN drugs administration on making sure, because remember, in the last few years, the Taliban and the Afghan government benefited from the drug trade. 90,000 tons of opium was cultivated and exported illegally. So Afghanistan can become the first legal narco state power. So India really has to have the high moral ground of ensuring pluralism, minority rights, and moving away from the geostrategic approach to a human security approach. And this is where I'll end today. Thank you.